and welcome to the Octavia Flynn Public Library's Authors Festival for 2021. Our theme this year has been visual storytelling. Thank you for joining us for our final session of the month. We have Translating Story to Image featuring 7000 BC and the New Mexico chapter of the American Institute of Graphic Artists. This panel features illustrators, graphic designers, and comic creators as they discuss the different ways to translate written story to visual. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our panelists.
Hi, thank you for having us. We are really happy to be here. My name is Caitlin. I'm going to be moderating our panel today. I just want to introduce our panelists really quick. So we have Vanessa Bowen, who is actually a alumni of the Gallup Library. And
yes.
Yeah, Vanessa, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I used to go to that library. I grew up in Gallup and went to high school there. So I would read a lot of books and I love that place. So yeah, hello, everyone.
And Vanessa is a designer and illustrator and also has roots in New Mexico and is also involved with AIGA. And recently just participated in an Adobe program in General Assembly and as a UX designer. So we're really happy to have her. Thanks for coming. And then next we have Eric Anthony Glover. He is a comics writer and screenwriter. Eric, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. I'm super honored. I'm a brand new graphic artist / graphic novelist. This is the first time anything I've ever written has been on a hardcover of anything. And I can't wait to gush about the person that I got to work with named Ariel Jovellanos, who is an excellent artist who helped this project really come to life. So again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Eric. We're excited to have his perspective as a writer with some of our visual people. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they'll get into a fight or something. We'll see what happens. Our next up, we have Chris Philpott, who is an illustrator based here in New Mexico. Chris, would you like to say hi?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really exciting, and I'm honored to be a part of the panel and looking forward to answering some questions as best I can and learning some things actually from all these incredible people. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, Chris is a longtime illustrator for editorial publications like Wired and New York Times, and also has recently been teaching himself how to animate some of his illustrations and stuff like that. And so he's, you know, on the edge, I guess. And then next up we have Michael Ellis, who's a multimedia artist. Michael, would you like to say hi?
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited.
Yeah, Michael is a longtime involved in 7000 BC and is a graphic artist for illustrator for comics and things like that. Do you want to talk about any of your projects, Michael?
Sure. Yeah. So I do comics. I'm sort of a comic artist with a fine art habit, or a fine artist with a comics habit. I'm not sure. But I recently completed a comic for a writer in Arizona, which just came out, which is pretty cool. And I don't want to plug it too hard, but it's pretty awesome. And then before that, I finished a project for Chaosium. So I did some illustrations for a Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. So I've kind of got lots of irons in the fire.
Thanks for being here, Michael. And then last up we have Jeff. Last but not least, Jeff is a longtime educator with 7000 BC and comics artist. And Jeff, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi. I'm really excited to be here and hear everybody else's perspectives and how you approach things. And I've been doing comics and theater, which is another version of language and image telling a story for a long time. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well along the way.
Thanks, Jeff. So we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. We will have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, and I'll also be sure to put up everyone's information where you can find people online and get to know their work and all of the people that they collaborate with. And so we'll go ahead and jump right in. So first up, I kind of wanted to talk about like this idea of transitioning from written word to visual language. You know, we often don't think about those things as being different languages, but they really are. Like, it's like visual literacy and written literacy are very different. So each of you kind of approach that in really different ways. You know, some of you work really closely with writers, some of you maybe work with an editor, or maybe you are a writer. And then I kind of wanted to get a sense from you guys, like what kind of specific, like kinds of challenges have you faced like in that transition period? Like what kinds of things do you find the most difficult about translating things from written word into visual language? And we'll start with Vanessa.
Yeah, so recently, at the start of the pandemic last year, I was approached by Eater to basically do like take a trip during the pandemic and write about it and then translate it into an illustrated essay. So that was really interesting because I really had to pay closer attention to detail, I felt like, because it was telling the story of my experience going out to camp with my family and then write about it, but then remembering those little details and then showcasing that in the work. So but I feel like pictures, you know, they say like a picture is worth 1,000 words, or like, you know, you get so much out of what you're seeing visually that sometimes the words don't necessarily have to be there. But if you're working in tandem, for me, it was interesting because I'm not necessarily like a writer, but to be put in that position to write and then also illustrate what I was writing, it was like it was a new approach to taking two mediums to find that balance, you know. So it was a great fun time, but you know, a little muscle I haven't used quite a bit was like writing. And that's the other thing, it's like writing can also be artistic. So I guess it's just like understanding how you're going to approach whatever you're doing, finding that like balance. And, you know, thankfully I'm not the person doing the artwork for someone else's words. Like I felt as if I had that, it was great to be able to write my story, know exactly what I was going to say, and then add the visuals to it. So, but, you know, I would like to hear others, you know, experience actually illustrating someone else's story, because for me, I just felt very lucky that I could do both.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. We'll kind of go around the panel. So Chris, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I work a lot with magazines, and I do a lot of informational work. So a big goal of what I'm doing is clarity. And when you're speaking with a visual language, you know, you're using images. The trickiest thing I found, and I think this is applicable to narrative work too, and fiction, is that we all have, you know, the 1,000 words that an image represents can be different for everybody. And you can put some symbols together that you think very clearly say one thing, and depending on who you're showing it to, they will get a completely different message. And it's, you know, the longer I've done this, the more permission I've given myself to use really basic, simple, universally understood symbols. I think when I started out, it was like, I don't want to use any cliches, and I want to invent whole new metaphors, and I want to have totally unique visuals that no one's ever used before. And that's basically gibberish. That's like talking in Russian to an English speaking audience. Like, it's novel and it's very interesting, but nobody knows what you're saying. And so I rely on the editors and art directors that I collaborate with to tell me, okay, we're getting this message, this is coming through, and I don't know what you did in the background, what that's supposed to be, but nobody knows what that is. But it's clear as day to me, and and I've been doing it for 20 years. So later on, when I started experimenting with, I've been learning more about like picture books and children's books and things like that. And you think that there are these very simple little narrative arcs and storytelling elements to include that the way you dress a character, the props that they're using, the background, the style. You think the colors that you're using. You're thinking these are all saying the same thing to the reader that you intended when you put them on the page. And the bottom line is, you really do need to lean heavily on other people. Not so much like a focus group, but you're just not the only arbiter of whether or not something makes sense.
Right.
It's
Visual
okay to be very
storytelling
direct.
is cultural, right?
Right.
That's a great point. Yeah. Eric, how do you feel about that as a writer? What's your perspective?
I was taking on this graphic novel. It was really hard for me to adjust my language, because I was speaking first and foremost to my illustrator, not to the audience that would hopefully be reading this book. So I had to communicate to her thoroughly and clearly what I wanted. And my training had been in screenwriting. The book that I wrote was based on a screenplay I had written some 5 years prior. And when it comes to the school of thought in writing scripts, there's a pretty common refrain that we shouldn't direct the page. We shouldn't add details like medium close up or pans to. And there's a lot of internet disputing on screenwriting Twitter about whether that's a valid way to communicate to our readers and audience. In any case, it had been completely ingrained in me that I needed to take kind of an almost passive role in telling my story. Keep it bare bones. What's the dialogue like? That's where you're going to sing, Eric. Otherwise, the shots and colors, composition, that's for the director. So it was really hard for me once I started writing this book, where I was being asked to be the director. I had to determine how many panels were on a page, what a single panel would encompass, what a character's face should be saying. I did my best on my first draft, and when I saw some of the layouts that Ariel, my wonderful illustrator, put forward based on my script, it was a bit of a come to Jesus moment where I had realized I had been too passive. Actually, Ariel, on this first page, what I meant is that the asteroids hit the ship from this angle. Could you just redo everything, please? Because I got it wrong the first time. Unfortunately, she was really gracious, but I had to become a lot more confident about taking control and trusting that wouldn't offend the artist. She was a person who was able to graciously, gracefully integrate my wishes into this work. And if she had a problem with it, she would tell me. But otherwise, it was carte blanche for me to just start partying creatively. So it was fun to embrace, although it was a little difficult at first.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective to just think about, like, how you're actually talking to someone else, that isn't in your same mindset. Yeah, Michael, do you have any thoughts on this?
I do. I think what Eric said was really interesting, because to me, every new project kind of starts with the relationship between the people on the creative team, and that the dynamics of that relationship can be very different depending on like the individuals involved and also the needs of the project and the end kind of product, and sometimes I've had some things that are very top down and are very sort of like, it needs to have the brief or whatever will be very specific and will be very specified. And then there are others where writers for comics in particular will kind of just say, well, there's a 3-page fight scene, have fun. Which, by the way, any aspiring comic writers, please don't do that, because that puts all of the weight on the artists. So give us something. But but like I said, I think the most challenging thing is kind of reestablishing a relationship, because whatever you had as a working sort of a working scheme in a previous gig won't necessarily be the same the next time around. So you kind of have to think on your feet and really listen to the other people on your team. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, it sounds like that can be a really like challenging sticking point. But it seems interesting, like even if you're a writer or an artist, you're going to have a bunch of different challenges, depending on who your team is every time. Jeff, do you have any thoughts about, like what do you think is that like biggest challenge when you're facing that kind of transition?
From words to image?
Yeah.
For me, it's a lot of time, it's simplifying things enough. I don't actually remember this, but the story I've always been told is that my mom, on my 3rd birthday, gave me a map of a 100-piece puzzle of a map of the US. And I spent all day and I got it done. And then the next day I did it twice. And the day after that, I flipped it over and did it the blank side. And I love puzzles. And I will complicate things as much as possible, which is not necessarily good when you've got a deadline.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, that can definitely, getting out of your own way can definitely be a challenge for sure.
Yeah. In some ways, it's a lot easier to simplify things when you're working with someone else, because then you're looking at what's the most essential. How do I communicate with this person best? What shared awarenesses do we have with this project? And because I like the puzzles, I'll look at that from as many different ways as I can. So, we might not be meeting necessarily on the project directly, but we might find some other way to meet, have a meeting of the minds that we can then use in working on the project.
Yeah, that really brings us into something else I wanted to talk about, which was kind of like what, a lot of you kind of collaborate with different teams in different ways. You had brought up some of that, kind of talking about the challenges, but one of the great things about collaboration is you really can propel your work that much farther, in ways that you didn't anticipate or that you didn't imagine was possible within a project. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of experiences have you guys had with that? And also, like, what kinds of input did somebody else bring to your project that made you think about it in a new way or helped bring your project to the next level? Like, what's an example maybe that you can think of in your mind of that playing out in your work? Vanessa, would you like to take a stab at this question?
Oh, like collaborating in general with people when it comes to
and
visual?
Just how has it helped? What's a positive experience that you've had with collaboration?
Yeah, I must admit that the best collaboration I've had is when people are able to be trusting with your ability to visually translate whatever it may be. So either it's like branding or a logo or just like an illustration, just that like trust and in that first initial communication, really, it's like a combination of both. It's like this being able to communicate, give all the details, and then finally be able to just like let go and trust and like allow me as the artist and to illustrate whatever that may be. And I find that those are like the best sort of relationships that happen, because then I don't feel as if I, like the micromanaging, I don't know, the level of anxiety kind of increases. And, I don't know, it's just the trust relationship really. And I've created some really great things with people who just, told me, hey, we're kind of looking for this and this feeling. And, you know, and yeah, like I would just say that's like basically the best positive relationships I've had with clients who needed me to illustrate whatever that may be.
Yeah, for sure. I think it can kind of play this balance between like, yeah, being really challenging and also being really rewarding. Chris,
Yeah.
do you have any experience where you felt like, that relationship was particularly rewarding, or some kind of input helped you realize something? Or
Yeah, there's a lot of times when I get initial feedback on some sketches, and I think it's insane or crazy. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, and these people don't know what they're doing, and my sketch was perfect, and this is ridiculous. And then, but what I've realized is if you treat it like improv and you just kind of yes and it and try to, even if it's false modesty, just stay humble and explore it. Every time I wake up the next morning and I'm like, I'm going to try their dumb idea, and it is almost always better. Like it is almost always like transcendent, and it's hard to admit, but over time, like it's just such a proven process that if I just give it the benefit of the doubt, and maybe they didn't phrase it the way I would like it to be phrased, or maybe I didn't understand what they were saying because I was thinking about something else. But like that's like a superpower to just give it a shot. Like they're reacting to something. They're telling you something. Like try to follow it, see where it leads. And I've had color palettes that are amazing that I never would have considered. I've had like, my whole style evolve. I've had whole new like avenues of clients open up because I pursued something that I just never would have done on my own. So.
Yeah, that's interesting, that idea of somebody giving you a piece of feedback and that it takes a little bit of exploring that feedback for it to actually be valuable to you. Like, yeah. Eric, what's your experience been like, from a writer's perspective of collaborating with a visual storyteller, and how that has been, a positive experience, and how that's changed how you work?
Ariel was a lifesaver. She and I have actually never met in person, so we had all of our communication over a phone call, emails. We only started texting after the book was finished. So I had to lean a lot on just giving notes on the actual layout she would give me with like, stickies that were digital, or just emailing her and telling her what I wanted. And occasionally there was pushback, but she would explain why she was saying, why she was going to stick with what she was doing. And like, oh yeah, you're right. That does visually communicate this idea better. And one thing that's going to stick with me forever, I've told this story in regards to what a great worker she is 7 million times now, but 7,000,001, here we go. She was there at the very beginning before there were any sketches of anything. She was the first to sketch anything having to do with this project. And I had written the original screenplay to include technology. It's futuristic technology that the main character is using. It's essentially like a phone attached to her wrist. So the protagonist has a lot of things that she's typing and searching for, and this becomes really repetitive and not very visually interesting after about 2 seconds, especially in a graphic novel and in a screenplay, which I'm going to have to make changes now because of Ariel. But one thing she did to innovate things from the very beginning was to imagine, instead of a tablet, being used by the main character. She put on essentially like Google Glass, like a visor for the main character that allowed the main character to interact with an augmented reality. So now instead of someone just squinting here, we all of a sudden have like a visual virtual world that can loom large or be small and nuanced. And that changed everything. An incoming call from someone could now have a different color palette that like makes it feel alarming, or a communication with someone else who happens to be the main character's mortal enemy can be a monumental thing, and the person can be towering over her while condescending to the main character at the same time. It was 100% a paradigm shift, and I wouldn't have thought of it if I didn't have an artist who was just willing to experiment, yes, and what I was doing, and just nudge me in the direction of exploration. So a lot of what Michael and Chris have been talking about really resonates, because I had the privilege of having someone elevate my work, and then I could become a fan of it all of a sudden. I was in the crowd being like, "Oh my God, Ariel, just well done over there."
Yeah, I love that idea of somebody like reconcepting something that you gave them. Like, you're like, no, I have this idea, this is how it is. And then you let them reconcept the fundamentals of the thing, and it completely changes how you tell the story. So leaning on your collaborators to bring new concepts to the table, for sure. Yeah. Michael, what has your experience been like with collaboration and any kind of positive experience you've had from that?
Yeah, so I have a few clients that are like repeat clients over a long period of time, and I've really enjoyed watching them grow and sort of being a part of their vision, and seeing how their vision will evolve as their business evolves, as their needs evolve, and as they are trying to expand their reach and stuff like that. And being able to, it's almost like raising kids or something, like, because when this particular collaboration that I'm thinking of, I do a lot of work with a local distillery in Albuquerque, and when it first got going, it was like just kind of a one and done sort of graphic design project that I did, designing labels. But then as the years have gone by, just again by nurturing that relationship, I've had some input into like what they've done, and that's kind of like tipped the visual language of their brand a little bit, and sort of nudged it in certain ways. And then they've also, like, they have their needs, and I have to serve those needs and be attentive to that. And I think it's allowed me to, it's rewarded a lot of curiosity, which I appreciate in working with a project of any kind. So, and seeing that like over the long term, it's really, really gratifying.
Yeah. That whole idea of like having to serve someone else really does put you in a position of like having to make decisions you wouldn't normally make.
Yeah. Especially when it's not like your product or something like that. Like you're making something for a person that it may not be their product might not be why you get up in the morning, but being able to tell the story is why you get up in the morning. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Jeff, I would love to hear your perspective on this too, especially coming from a little bit of theater and stuff like that. Theater is all collaboration for the most part, I feel.
It is. It's interesting to see where there are sort of hierarchical separations where you don't normally get collaboration, because I really believe in collaborating with everyone that is involved in the project to strengthen the project. But like, for instance, there was once I was working on a show that was about this young girl in a trailer park, and she would go off into the desert and do these little rituals to sort of help her deal with the bad house, the bad home life that she had. And there was nothing in the script that specifically talked about the location where she would go. But the director had decided we wanted to see it, even though, so that she could be doing that while other scenes were going on. And so the woman that was in the show was like 23 years old, playing 15, something like that. But she had been acting since she was like 2 years old. And so I asked to the director, can I grab her next, after the next rehearsal and talk to her about what her thought process is for what she's going to be doing over there, so I can build an appropriate space for her. And it took like a week and a half for the director to convince her that I actually wanted to talk to her about the design and not just hit on her, because no one had ever done that in her entire 20 years of performing. So it's nice to actually work on a project where you could do that,
Yeah, that's so powerful, bringing someone who like isn't the writer and isn't the artist, but like is a mediator of the story or one of the tellers of the story to like
Right.
come in and help translate part of the story and like do that thing that Eric was talking about, where it's like reconcept something that maybe was in the script, maybe wasn't. Like that's pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see how it can sort of reflect, the different people involved can reflect back to you how things are actually working. I did another show where it was about a corporation that was going into a country where there was this primitive tribe that had never dealt with anybody until recently outside of their tribe, and they all wore masks, and so the masks were these enormous things that would stretch all the way down their body, that the elders in the tribe had ones that were all organic, but progressively as you got younger members of the tribe, they would be made of like circuit boards and Coke cans and that kind of thing. And so when I first made the first mock-ups of the masks, we did a rehearsal where everybody just tried on different masks. And when I was making them up, there was one where I needed one more and I just didn't have time. So I just took a piece of poster board, poked a couple holes in it, and that was it. And nobody would try it on. We were doing all this improv with these things and nobody would try it on. And so finally, right at the end, I tried it on. And I was like, oh my God, I'm Hitler. It was like the most powerful mask and evil. And that's why everyone was avoiding it. And I got no idea.
Yeah, you just sometimes you don't
who's-
know.
I was going to say, I think any kid who's ever done a science fair project knows that that was the most evil mask, because it was poster board.
Yeah, you never know how something you make is going to carry weight at the, like once it's done, it almost has a life of its own. Yeah, that's really interesting experience. Yeah, I wanted to kind of ask everyone too a little bit about you each kind of brought this up in different ways when you were talking about collaboration, but I wanted to ask specifically like what kinds of strategies or tools that you guys do use with people who have different skill sets than you, so like, not just hitting on the actress, but, like, how do you bring in those people who are not, maybe not familiar with being in a visual storytelling setting? Like, what kind of like process or strategies or things do you like to use? Vanessa?
Yeah, so lately I've been using Miro, which is kind of like a virtual whiteboard, but I'm able to sort of like load in some sketches that are made, and sometimes, doing it that way, a lot of, that collaboration is like key there. So people could like add notes, or they could say, oh, something like this, or, they go to like Google and they could drop in an image. So it's just this really cool way of, since we are in this like COVID times, this has been like a really awesome tool to use. And, because I find that a lot of people sometimes they don't know how to express what they want. And no matter how many times you like talk about it, those words really aren't there. So just having that combination of asking them like, hey, well, if you're inspired by something, or if there's something that you've seen that, that you want recreated, like just drop it in on this like virtual whiteboard and we could like work this out. So that's how I've been working with others lately. And it has been super, super helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've used that tool before, and it can be really powerful to help moderate groups of people and ideas and things like that. Yeah. Chris, do you have any tools or strategies you'd like to share?
One thing that has been working for me is just kind of rapid prototyping things. So you get the brief, and then as soon as possible, you kind of put all of the important elements together in as many ways as you can that you think solves the problem or advances, accomplishes the goal, and then you get as much feedback and just plan on as many rounds as you can. I used to, earlier on in my career, I tried to just nail it like on the first try, and I would, burn a week, trying to have the perfect solution. So I didn't have any feedback and there was no criticism and anything like that. And that just wasted a week. What you need to do, because a lot of times the brief is not accurate. Like the brief's going to evolve, or they didn't know what they were asking for, and now they've thought better of it, or now that they've seen it, they're like, oh, this isn't going to work. You did just what I asked for. None of this is relevant. So it's not, when you get a lot of feedback when you're making images or being a designer or an art director, it's not necessarily your fault that it's not successful, but you got to flush out all of that stuff. And, wasting time in the beginning, trying to be too precious is just going to push the deadline so much closer and cause scheduling problems. And then everybody relaxes because the project has started. They all have more time to finesse details later, and it's just been, it probably took me a decade to get to the point where I was willing to do that, because I used to think I was wasting effort, but it really is probably the most efficient way for me to work with people.
Yeah, that I think it was very rare that a first round is like, good to go, this is done, send it to print. I think that idea of not being too precious is definitely a powerful strategy, and it helps to bring in those collaborators early, right? Yeah. Eric, what's your feeling on this? Like, what kinds of strategies and tools do you use from your side?
Yeah, I was in a unique position of having no skills to offer Ariel when it came to what I wanted her to draw. I had to draw on things other people had done sometimes in order to get my point across. So in one instance, I knew that I wanted to communicate like kind of chapter breaks in a unique way. And this is very lo-fi way of showing you. I could have shared these, but why not just hold up an image to the screen? If you can see it, there's a vague Roman numeral on this side with panels like interspersed between it. And I was like, okay, yeah, Ariel. All right. So I don't know if you've seen like the intro theme song for like The Leftovers, but when that's happening on screen, like there are people that are like a slightly different hue than the background behind them. She took that and did her best with it, which I was really thankful for. I also told her that I had seen Interstellar, and something that had really fascinated me about that whole maybe second half of the movie, if not a bit earlier, was that these other worlds that the characters were going to that could possibly be new shelters for humanity weren't very pretty. I think the expected way to show promising places for humanity to seek refuge would have been through showing basically Edens, right? Like really beautiful, idyllic, Elysium types of places for just the eyes to feast on. But real life largely doesn't live up to those kinds of expectations. So I asked Ariel to consider that the places that the main characters would be going in the story would just be kind of mundane. And that would mean that the drama would really have to be focused on the interpersonal beefs between the characters. So I asked her to consider Interstellar, a really small indie film by a little known guy named Chris Nolan. So I sometimes had like big lofty goals for her to keep in mind with like IMAX Hollywood budgets. But she did great. She did so great. It was really lovely to have these kinds of references around to just use as a cheat sheet for her, for sure. Oh, and just a small response to Chris. I am the king of just trying my best to never hear a negative word of feedback. So I completely understand the impulse to try to make it as perfect as possible so that you can avoid that like initial stinging pain of someone saying that your work isn't perfect on the first go. But how do we grow if we do that? So good for you. And I'll be trying to adhere to the same ideas. Well done, man.
Yeah, both those things are definitely good tools, like references, especially when you're doing that translation bit, right? When you're trying to be like, I don't know how to describe this visual phenomenon that's happening, or this thing that I think I saw once in a movie or something, or on an ad for Publix, I don't know. So like trying to reference different materials like, that we see and interact with is definitely can be really helpful. Yeah. Michael, do you have any strategies or tools that you would like to share?
So I totally use the other movie thing, or the music video thing, or the album cover thing, or the intro to this movie thing, like all the time, because it's much easier to speak that language with like non-visual artists than it is to be like, I don't know, delving into art history and talking about the effects of certain kinds of blue or some crap. I mean, like, so I find that just that shared kind of ground, that common ground, is actually very useful. And something that another illustrator just turned me on to, actually, that I'm excited about and I want to try. So I keep a sketchbook. I think most people do, most artists do. And it's really messy and exploratory, and just like all kinds of craziness happens inside the sketchbook. And a lot of times, I think a lot of artists would never dream of showing that, because it's not the perfect thing that Chris was talking about. It's like, it's kind of the whole rear end, as they say. And so, but if that's your process, and your process is really like this kind of visual mind dumping, I actually think sharing the sketchbook with the client can be a tremendous tool, because sometimes what can happen is that they might see something that is in a less finished, less polished state, that's more raw and exciting, and in that way is getting more at like what they're trying to say, and they might want that, and like could call the project right there, or could just say, could you do that with some other things added, instead of like having the super polished thing. So that's a new strategy that I'm going to be trying, is just like showing them the messy sketchbook pages, and letting, because that's a way to invite them into your thought process, because I think a lot of us visual art folk have a hard time communicating, in writing or whatever. So showing them how you think, and just being like, point at the thing that you like or don't like, and tell me what not to draw again, or whatever, I think can be very helpful.
Right. Yeah. And it's that thing of just like trying not to be too precious about things. But Yeah, I like how some sketchbook stuff does have a quality that maybe you would lose once you start cleaning up and polishing, that your collaborator could really latch onto. But
Well, I think that's an important thing too, that you might be just in like your overarching career, you might be too precious in general, and you might be too polished and therefore too tentative, you know, and you might not be giving yourself your full, you might not be living up to your full potential because you're trying too hard at the wrong thing, right? So you never know, that bit of collaboration might actually push you in the direction that you need to go.
yeah. Jeff, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about using the really rough drawings and that kind of thing. That was something I learned at a painting class in college. I had a painting professor who just kept coming over when I was painting things and saying, just do that right there in your sketchbook. And finally I did, and I went, oh, that's how it works. Yeah, depending on who I'm working with and what the project is, it really makes a big difference what sort of things I can show. Sometimes I'll be working with someone where I really need to go back and redraft my thumbnails 4 times before I can show them because they need it that precise. But then when I'm working with Courtney, who I've done a few projects with, Courtney Angermeyer, she's both an artist and a writer, same as I am. So we're just in each other's business, and I'll show her very rough things that are incomprehensible for the most part because I've reworked them, sketched over them too many times, but we'll have a discussion about what it is. It'll be there to spark the discussion, and from that we're able to get somewhere.
Yeah, that's so funny. So we're all talking about, you know, this idea of like the thing that's unfinished, right? So we have one more question that got brought up was how do you know when something is done? You know, like, you know, you spend this effort and energy, you know, going through the process of feedback and collaborating with people and going back and forth and showing the unfinished and revising and all this stuff. But how do you know when to step away, when to move on? But I don't know, maybe the deadline, maybe that's it. But Vanessa, do you have an idea of like when is something done?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny being like an artist, but then also being like a user experience designer. As an artist, I always used to add too much and then it would get too busy. So there's like this fine balance that I found that I needed to maintain, because I feel like design and art, you know, like simple, bold really speaks. But, you know, when you start adding things, it's like too much. So it's like overdone. So there's like this balance that you got to find. But then of course, on the flip side, like in terms of design, it's going to always be this iterative process because you're always improving. So yeah, like when it comes to art and like illustration, I try to go with the minimal bold approach versus like adding too much, because then it takes away from what you're really trying to convey. So yeah, it's a fine line, and eventually as you progress as an artist, you tend to get a better feel for that.
Yeah, so when you really simplify it down to its essence and it says what it needs to say, that's a good way to put it.
Yes,
Chris,
exactly.
When do you think something is done?
Well, yeah, running out of time used to be my answer, but I can't get away with that anymore. What I like to do is, especially if you're working digitally, I like to go too far, to like push things till they break, and then know that you can go back, you know, tell yourself you probably need to go back 2 or 3 iterations before you overworked it. You know, like there was a sweet spot in there, and go ahead and, you know, make sure you went far enough. But But if give yourself time to come back at it with fresh eyes and a clear head and look at it objectively, or even have someone else look at it objectively and say, your sketches had life in them, and then here's when you suffocated it, and now it's like a corporate piece of plastic. So now that is worthless. Like, what you want is the value, that the humanity. A lot of times, like you want the epiphanies, and you want the delight, and you want the communication, all of that. And there's usually a point in all of the iterations where it's at its peak. And and if you're working traditionally, like, sometimes it's a matter of doing it several times, like literally doing the same painting 4 times sometimes, and it's like your first one sometimes is the best. So that's my answer.
Yeah. So it's done, but then you got to do it a couple more times. But really, you're trying to not degrade the quality of work. So like, it's sort of like when you reach the top of the bell curve and then you stop, like, kind of keep yourself from like messing with it too much. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Eric, what about you? When do you think that the process is done?
I think a healthy place to stop for me is usually when I'm devastatingly burnt out. I think just in general, when I have no joy left in the process any longer, is when I start to think it might be time to move on to something else. I do try to approach every project with a sense of what's giving me joy about it. Like, what's the scene that's going to make me feel like this is the coolest thing anyone's ever seen. And I can go back to that well quite a bit. That'll motivate me, because even if I don't get it the first time and people don't respond the way I want them to, I have enough confidence in my taste to try a few more times to convince people, no, this is as cool as I said it was. You just don't get it yet. So after, I don't know, I'd say I average around 4 or 5 drafts per script. And if at that point, like, people are still not feeling it's amazing, I open myself up to saying, hey, there might be other things that can make me happier a little faster than this, if nothing else is riding on it. Of course, if other people are depending on me to get something done, then I have to do it in a certain amount of time. Deadlines, of course, really help. And the bizarre thing with like putting out a book for the first time is that I couldn't add any more to it. I couldn't make any changes. And then I was starting to think about, oh, wait, hold on, this dialogue isn't as clear as I wanted it to be. Can everyone just log on to Facebook so I can explain this page to you guys? I wanted more chances, but it was permanent, it's etched in stone. So I have to exercise a new muscle now of accepting that it's done, and just being proud of trying my best in the first place.
Yeah, I think that that thing you brought up of just like really leaning on your collaborators to help you decide whether or not something is interesting enough to be done, or if like it's just not getting there and it's just a roadblock to actually getting the rest of the thing done, like that can be a really powerful tool, I think, in helping, so helping you not like fixate on like the thing that will never go away, but sometimes it is worth it. You could just put that in your back pocket and then just nurse it for years, and then it'll become another thing. So, maybe some of those things are never done. But Michael, what about you? How do you feel like, when is something done?
I don't know. But I do think that having collaborators who can say, yes, this is it, or, not good enough, but this is what we were trying to say, I think that is invaluable. But finishing stuff and leaving it alone it's so tricky. It's so tricky. I don't know.
Yeah, having that collaborator being like, stop touching it, like, just let it go.
Leave it alone, back away.
Yeah, I like how you and Eric both brought up this idea of like, there's a certain level of self-acceptance and just being like, I have to let it go. Like, it's like, just let it out into the world and let it be its thing.
I don't know if it's self-acceptance as much as just like tortured, anguished, like just your soul breaks in half and you're done.
I
like
that.
It's totally cool.
A little bit of burnout, a little bit of, being a proud parent, that's kind of like what parenthood's like. I assume.
Parenting is definitely burnout. So
Jeff,
anyway.
what about you? What's your perspective on this?
See, well, I liked what Chris was saying about don't kill the sketch too much. And that's something that I've been learning more and more the older I get. And I think that's partly recognizing that there's worth in that looseness, but also recognizing that I'm getting older and I still have other things I want to get done. So if I'm going to get those done, I got to let this one go a little sooner. I think also though that part of collaborating includes every step of the way. So if you're dealing with the printer, that's still part of the project. That's still part of the comic. And you're collaborating with them, even if it's something that seems pretty straightforward. And I think that's true more so for me than some other people, just because I tend to try and push things to the limits of the medium. So I complicate things. Back to the puzzles. I complicate things. I don't know that I ever really finish the puzzles. Because there's always, one more piece that I can, wish I could put in there. But yeah, I think when the deadline's up, and if there's no deadline, it's just, you've got to let go.
Yeah.
So that you can move on and do another project. Maybe a project is done when another project takes precedence.
Yeah, a project is done when another project takes precedence. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. And sometimes the first project doesn't get done because the second project's more fun. But I think that there's a lot of what you guys are talking about in terms of you really do have a relationship with these stories. You have a relationship with this art and with how you're telling the story or how you're designing a thing or how you're writing it. And, it's hard to let go of that relationship. Like any relationship, it's not over. It's just, even after you give it away to the public to digest, you're still going to be nursing ideas about it. And I think what Jeff said is probably, I saw everyone nodding. It's just kind of yep, when another project takes precedence, that's when it's time to let it go and you just move on. But
one of my favorite things about doing theater is strike, when you get to tear it all down, because then it's definitely done.
When you get to tear it all down. Yeah. Well, sadly, I think we're done for today, and let's tear it all down for the day. And I want to share everyone's information here so that we can, if you would like to follow any of these artists or creative people online, this is where you can find them. And you can also follow us, our organizations. We try to do educational programming, social meetups, things like that for people who are looking to collaborate or grow their skills or anything like that. So you can find 7000 BC on their website, 7000bc.org, and AIGA New Mexico at newmexico.aiga.org. And I also wanted to offer up, if Jeff wanted to say anything else about 7000 BC. AIGA is our professional association for graphic design, and we are open and available to anybody, even if you are not a member. And Jeff, if you'd like to say anything, final words for 7000 BC.
Sure. Yeah, we're also kind of a support group as well as being a nonprofit. We're a support group for people making comics. And in non-COVID times, we meet semi-regularly, usually here in Albuquerque or in Santa Fe. And anybody's welcome to come and get feedback. And you know, it can be somebody just thinking about doing a comic for the first time, or you know, long time professional. We also do a lot of educational work, and we have an ongoing series that we've been doing online called Between the Panels, that you can find on Eventbrite. So that's what
Sounds
I
like-
can tell you about us.
Jeff, it sounds like you might be cutting out a little bit, so I'll just repeat. They're doing a ongoing panel called ongoing series of workshops called Between the Panels. You can find out more information on their website if you guys didn't catch that. Thank you so much to the Octavia Felon Library for having us, and we hope to be back again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Thanks, Anne.
Yes. Ooh, thank you everyone for joining us today. I will say thank you to our viewers out there online. This is the last session for the Authors Festival that lasted the entire month of May. If there are any panels that you have missed, please go check out our YouTube channel. You will find archived sessions of all of the live streams and all of the workshops there. And we hope to see you guys soon. Remember that summer reading begins in June. Goodbye.